Hey there. If you're a university student, I bet you've seen this before. A note from your professor on your paper that says something like, needs more evidence. But what does that even mean? Well, you're in the right place. Let's break it all down.
Yeah, seeing that comment can be frustrating, right? The thing is, evidence isn't just one simple thing. It actually comes in a few different flavors. And once you understand them, it is the secret to writing a really, really strong paper. So, here's our game plan. First up, we'll cover the two main types of evidence. Then, we'll dive into what I call research with numbers and research with stories. After that, we'll see how the pros combine them. And the best part, we'll finish with exactly how you can use all this in your very next assignment. All right, let's get right into it. In the academic world, there are really two big ways that researchers gather information to build their arguments. Let's take a look at what they are. I like to think of it like this. There are two different worlds of research. First, you have the quantitative world, which is all about numbers. And then you have the qualitative world, and that's the world of stories. One counts things, the other explains them. Okay, let's jump into that first world, the world of numbers, quantitative. The easiest way to remember this is to think of the word quantity, right? It's all about things we can actually measure and count. Quantitative research uses something called empirical evidence. I know, that sounds like a big, fancy term, but all it really means is information you get from watching things happen or from doing experiments. It's evidence you can literally see and measure. And this leads us to a really simple but super important idea: correlation. Correlation is just when we notice that two things seem to happen at the same time. For example, when the weather gets really hot, what happens? Ice cream sales go way up. Those two things, the hot weather and the high ice cream sales, are connected. They have a correlation. But here's the big question. Does the hot weather cause the sales to go up? Well, that leads us to our next key idea. And that idea is causality. This one is much, much stronger than just a correlation. Causality means you can actually prove that one thing is the direct reason another thing happens. It's not just a coincidence, it's a real cause and effect relationship. Let me give you a more serious example. After tons and tons of scientific studies, researchers have proven that smoking directly causes lung cancer. See the difference? That's causality, and it's a very powerful claim to be able to make with evidence. So how in the world do researchers find these things? Well, they often study really large groups of people. You might see a study that includes 1,000 people, or maybe even more. And there's a very specific reason they do that. The main goal is something called generalizability. It's another big word, but it's a simple idea. It means that whatever they learn from studying that smaller group of people, their sample, can also be true for a much, much larger group, maybe even for everyone. Okay, so we've spent some time in the world of numbers. Now let's step over into the world of stories with qualitative research. And just like before, there's a clue in the name. When you see qualitative, think of the word quality. This kind of research is all about finding deep meaning. So instead of statistics and spreadsheets, the data here is words. Researchers do things like sit down and interview people, read personal diaries, or observe how people live their lives. The goal is to understand experiences from their perspective. Here's a perfect example of the difference. Let's talk about a failed test. A quantitative study, the numbers, 1, can tell you how many students failed. Maybe it was 30%. That tells you what happened. But a qualitative study would interview those students to find out why they failed. You might learn they were really stressed or didn't understand the teacher. It gives you the story behind the number. So you see, the real power of qualitative research is that it gives us this incredibly deep and detailed understanding of a specific situation or group. It's not usually something you can apply to everyone, but its strength is in that depth and detail. So we have numbers on one side and we have stories on the other. But what happens when you put them together? Well, that's when things get really interesting. You get what's called mixed methods research, and it can be incredibly powerful. The key skill here is synthesis. All that means is taking different pieces of information, like numbers and stories, and weaving them together to create a new, more complete understanding that is way stronger than either piece by itself. Let's walk through an example. Imagine a study about a smart hospital. The quantitative data, the numbers part, might show that new sensors help nurses get their tasks done 20% faster. That's a useful fact, right? But then,
We add the qualitative data. We interview a nurse who says the new tech also makes her feel safer and more connected to her patients. Wow, that adds a human story to our number. And that is the power of mixed methods. The number tells us what happened. The nurses got faster. The story tells us how it felt and why it mattered. When you put them together, you finally get the full picture.
Okay, this is all very interesting, but how do you actually use it? Let's get practical and talk about how this all applies to your next writing assignment. So as you're planning your next essay, think about organizing your evidence like this. For one main point, use some quantitative data, like a statistic. For another point, use a qualitative source, like a case study or an interview with an expert. And here's a pro tip. When you go to your university's library database, you can actually use the keywords quantitative or qualitative in your search to find exactly the kind of evidence you need. You know, by understanding and using these different types of evidence, you're doing so much more than just writing an essay for a grade. You're learning the language of academic research. You are becoming a researcher yourself, and you're getting ready to join this huge global conversation. So the only question is, what will you add to